How's it everyone, Grant here, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my review of the ZTE Blade X Max. So first off, I want to thank ZTE for providing me this phone for review, as well as to share with all of you. So the Blade X Max is available exclusively through Cricket Wireless for $150, or $100 if you port in a line to Cricket. And at that price, any of those prices, this phone is an absolute steal. Even though it's a budget phone, it performs well above its price point. The Blade X Max has a large 6-inch TFT Full HD 1080p LCD display with approximately 367 pixels per inch, and it uses Dragon Trail glass instead of the traditional Corning Gorilla Glass for scratch resistance. It has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 435 CPU clocked at 1.4 GHz. It has the Adreno 505 GPU, 2 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of storage, and it supports micro SD card expansion up to 128 gigs. The front camera is a 5 megapixel shooter that's capable of recording up to 1080p video. The rear camera is 13 megapixels, also supporting up to 1080p video. Neither of the cameras have optical image stabilization nor software image stabilization. It has a fairly large 3400 mAh battery and supports Quick Charge 2.0. It also supports Dolby Audio, and it also has a fingerprint scanner that you see right here on the back. And I love that budget devices like this are now coming with fingerprint scanners, and it's actually pretty quick. You can see it unlock the device. So let's just get things started with performance. I usually like to start with performance because if a phone doesn't perform fairly well and just lags all over the place, I'm not going to use it, and quite frankly, neither should you. So like I said earlier, the Blade X Max comes with a lower end Snapdragon 435 processor, but with a fairly stock build of Android like you can see here. Everything is fairly fast and fluid, moving around the UI. There's no major hiccups or issues. Everything is fairly snappy. It does have some little bit longer animations than I like, but I do like animations because it provides a level of smoothness versus very limited animations, which can make the experience look very jerky. So I usually go into developer options and turn the animations down into 0.5 times instead of the stock 1 time. But this is at full stock 1 time, and you can see it here. It is fast and fluid, but it's a little bit longer than I would personally like. And if we just go ahead and start opening up some apps, app launch times are pretty decent and respectable. Nothing to really complain about here. And if you can see there, the scrolling in Twitter, it's a little bit choppy. Not too bad, nothing that's gonna really take away from the experience, but it's not as smooth as some of your higher end phones. So just something to note. We can also go ahead and open up something like Instagram there. You can see it open up fairly quickly. And we can go ahead and scroll through that, and that's a little bit smoother there. We can go back into and open up another app like Google+, and Google+ is another media intensive app, and as you can see here, it's actually fairly smooth, so it handles those Google+ cards fairly well. And we can also launch something like YouTube. Go into subscriptions, and you can kind of see it load up, and we can scroll through these. Again, these are obviously graphic intensive with all the thumbnails, and the scrolling through here is pretty fast and fluid, and the screen is pretty responsive there. So like I said earlier, it does come with only 2 gigs of RAM, and while it doesn't really seem to impact performance as far as daily use is concerned, moving around the UI, launching apps, and moving through recent apps like you see here, where it really does impact is multitasking. So we just launched only a handful of apps here, so if we go back to the first one we launched, which is Twitter, if I tap that, it's going to reload it. And so this is going to be the case because, at least in my experience, Android phones with 2 gigs of RAM or less will always have these reload issues. Anything with 3 gigs or above seems to be just fine. And so as you can see here, as I go through all these apps are going to reload. And these are only like 1, 2, 3, 4 apps, right? And already, as I just launched them, and they're already having to reload. And while that might seem nitpicky because the reload times are fairly quick, there are practical examples where this can be a pain. So if you want to cut and paste between apps, for example, and you don't want to use the split screen that's built in here because you want that full screen to be able to write in and to select a lot of text. If I go ahead and select text from one app, move it into the other app, that app that I go back to will refresh, and if I was already typing in some text, all that text would be lost and I'm gonna have to start over again. So it can be frustrating to have to deal with that multitasking and that reloads, but that's just an inherent limitation of practically any Android phone that's gonna have 2 gigs of RAM or less. Another thing to note as we go into the memory settings here, it almost always shows 1.5 to 1.6 gigs of the 1.8 available used. So even from the moment I unboxed it, if you go back to the unboxing video, out of the box, 1.6 gigs were being used. So I don't know if this is misinformation about how much RAM is actually being used, because that seems really high. I would think if this much was always being utilized, performance would be pretty poor, but it's not. And so I'm just wondering if this is a possible bug in how the memory is being reported. But just something minor to note there, it really isn't not impacting performance. But if you just happen to notice that, don't worry, that's happening on mine as well, and performance is just fine. So moving on to software, and like I mentioned before, The Blade X Max, like a lot of ZTE phones, pretty much uses a stock build of Android with a very light skin. The only place where you're going to notice a lot of deviation from stock Android is probably the launcher here, where it's not going to be your traditional stock Android launcher, but it's nothing heavy and it performs very well. So no complaints about the launcher so much. And if you go into the pull down, very much stock Android. Hit settings, all this is very much stock looking. And if you notice, you're getting Android 7.1.1 out of the box. So for a $150 or $100 phone, you're getting the latest version of Android, which is pretty awesome. And it is currently running the March 1st security patch. So hopefully these security patch updates will come. ZTE is typically fairly good about updating their phones. Maybe not the quickest, but they do push out updates. So we can go through some of the software features that are customized by ZTE and added on top of stock. You can go into display here, and they have the option for pressing the power button twice to launch your camera from the lock screen, so that's nice. You get quick access to your camera. Although a fairly stock option, what I would suggest is that you consider modifying your display size here. So if we tap on that, by default, it's going to come at this medium default setting. And what that does is really impacts the amount that you can fit onto your launcher here. So if you notice, I've now only got a grid of 4, and it's really taking up a lot of the screen with a lot of gapping between the icons. And so you've got this big, beautiful 6-inch display. You want to be able to maximize the real estate there. So I really suggest you go in here, and if your eyes can handle it, set it down to small, because that'll give you back an extra grid of icons, and you can fit a little bit more there and really maximize the size of this display. And the last thing in display settings is being able to enable this pulse notification light. And I really like that because when you get notifications that come in, this home button will actually pulse in and out as your notification light instead of a blinking light up top like a lot of phones do. And it's actually a really cool effect, and I wish ZTE would include this on all their phones. Moving on to sound settings, what really stands out here is their Dolby audio enhancement and integration. So here you can select from a bunch of different equalizer presets, or you can actually go ahead and customize your own. If we tap on this, it'll actually take you into the Dolby Audio app. Or again, you can select from your different presets, or you can tap on any of those and modify them. So you have a lot of options here actually. Volume levelers, dialogue enhancers. You can go and actually customize your EQ here by playing with this settings here. So while not precise, it is an option to go and further customize your audio versus just using canned EQ presets. And let me tell you, the Dolby Audio really works, and we'll get into more of that when we start talking about audio. Other custom settings here, if we scroll down, is your Mi Pop. So this is pretty standard for most ZTE phones. And so it's just a custom shortcut menu that appears on top of your screen. So if we enable it, you'll see it right there. And it'll have, by default, just one button that you can customize as the default singular button, or you'll see additional shortcuts around for screenshots, lock, and mute. But you can go ahead and customize that and say which one do you want to appear as your primary button. So if you want it to be home, lock, screenshot, or any other button as your primary button, you can customize that here. Personally, I just keep this off because I find it to be a little bit more of a distraction on my screen, but it is an option if you like those kind of shortcuts. Next, we can move into the security settings, and the custom option that they have here is in the fingerprint setup. So I'll put in my pin here real quick. And you'll notice they have an option here for quick open app. So if we tap on that, you can actually customize what app is launched from your lock screen when you unlock it with each of the fingers that you have set up. So I can go to finger 1 here, which is my left index finger, and I can select to launch the camera button when I unlock my phone. So if I turn it off right now and I unlock it with that finger, it'll unlock the phone and launch that app that I selected, which is the camera app there. And the last custom option that I want to highlight here is navigation key. So you can reverse the order of these capacitive buttons on the bottom here. So by default, it's traditional Android where you've got your back on the left, recent apps on the right. If you're coming from maybe a Samsung phone where it's opposite, you can go ahead and switch them. Or if you just want to switch them because that's how you like it, you can do that right here. And a couple other software issues that I wanted to point out was, I noticed from the lock screen, ads started appearing for some reason, and I couldn't figure it out, but eventually I tracked it down to this pre-installed Z camera app here, and that was causing some ads to appear on that lock screen. And so if you notice that on your unit and you don't really like that, you can go ahead and uninstall it like I did. I tried to reinstall it because it's just an app that you can find in the Play Store to see if I could reproduce that just for this video, but I couldn't. And so I think it's just something to do with the custom pre-installed app that comes with the Blade X Max there. So if you see some ads on your lock screen, you can go ahead and uninstall that Z camera app, and it should take care of the issue. If you really liked the features in that Z camera app, you can go ahead and reinstall it from the Play Store, and I'm not seeing any kind of ads appearing on the lock screen, so it should be safe to reinstall from the Play Store if you really like that app. So the other software issue I wanted to point out was in YouTube. If you actually go and you launch a video that supports 60 frames per second video like this, either 1080p 60 frames per second or even 720p, anything at 60 frames per second. If you start watching it at that resolution, after a few minutes the screen will go black, the audio will keep playing, but you won't be able to see the video. You're gonna have to relaunch that video and it's gonna be fine. So I first noticed this because somebody left a comment about this in my unboxing video, and I didn't run into that particular issue myself just yet, but over time it finally happened to me, and I was able to figure it out and trace it down to that 60 frames per second resolution. If I went back and I watched this video or any video back at anything else that other than a 60 frame per second resolution, so if you're just watching a normal 1080p, or if you switch this out to something like 480p, you won't run into that issue. You'll be able to get through the whole video just fine. So I know other people have mentioned this and reported it, so hopefully ZTE can actually fix this with a software update, because it is a bit annoying to not be able to get that full resolution on your YouTube videos. So now let's move on to display. And as I mentioned before, the Blade X Max has a very large 6-inch Full HD 1080p TFT LCD display. Most panels are IPS displays, and the thing with TFT displays is that they supposedly have worse color reproduction, worse viewing angles, and are supposedly not as good as those IPS LCD panels. And on the Blade X Max, I have not found that to be true. Colors all look nice and vibrant, not as saturated as an OLED display, but not really washed out either. I mean, if you look at the Google icons, I like to show these off because they're very colorful. They all look very good, very vibrant. I'm not having issues with that. And if I look at the viewing angles on this, if I tilt it this way or max to the sides, I'm not seeing any kind of ghosting or any kind of weird tinting going on. It all looks very good. And if I go here to the brightness, we can take it off auto and crank it all the way up here, and you can see how bright it really gets. So it does get very, very bright. I can go back and dim it, and even at a lower level here like this, under these lights, it still looks very good. So I'll go put it back into auto brightness so it just can calibrate itself to the light. Indoors, I'll use it at 50% with no issues, and viewing it in direct sunlight doesn't give me any problems at all. You'll have to crank it up to 100% if you're looking at it in direct sunlight, but everything is still visible, and that shouldn't give you too much trouble. But no issues with colors, brightness, or viewing angles at all. This panel looks very, very good for a budget device. This is actually a really nice panel. Actually, not even for a budget device. For any phone, you'll be more than happy with this display. And as I mentioned earlier, this is using the Dragon Trail glass for scratch protection versus the standard Corning Gorilla Glass. But I've used this for over a month now, and I've not noticed any kind of scratching. I'll even shine this up for you, and I'll bring this up to the camera, and I'll try to get it at various angles so you can see. I don't really see any scratches because I'm pretty sure there are none. So I've not used any kind of a screen protector on this at all. I put it in my pocket. Of course, I'm not going to put it in a pocket with keys or anything like that. And I'll even lay it face down sometimes, but I'm not scratching it around. So, you know, I'm not babying the phone, but I'm also not doing things like putting it in with my keys or doing anything to intentionally try to scratch it. So, and over that time, over the better part of the month, you can see it's held up very well. I don't see any visible scratches. So even though it's Dragon Trail glass, you may not have heard of that. You're more used to Gorilla Glass. I haven't had any issues with scratches on my display so far. So now let's move on to design. It's definitely going to be a large phone. After all, it has a 6-inch display and a traditional 16:9 aspect ratio. They haven't gone to the new trend this year of that 18.5 or 18:9 aspect ratio that some of the bigger manufacturers like Samsung or LG have gone towards. So it's going to be a fairly large device, but it's not unnecessarily large, and it's really no larger than any other device that has a 6-inch display with a traditional 16:9 aspect ratio. The front bezels don't look too big to me either. You can see that top bezel does not look unnecessarily large, and the bottom bezel looks fine. It does house those capacitive buttons, so it's not unproportionately large. And if you notice, those capacitive buttons at the bottom do light up, so that is a nice touch. Not all budget phones have these light up capacitive buttons, so I really like that. So now if we take a look at the frame of the phone and look around the sides here, it looks like aluminum, but I'm pretty sure that's just coated plastic. But if you're just looking at it, it'll make you second guess that. And even I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna guess that it is coated plastic. So it's really well done. It doesn't look cheap, and it does add a bit of a aluminum look to the phone for the frame. And we can also take a look at the buttons on the side. They're not loose or anything, very clicky and just fine there. But what I do like is the beveling on the home button. I do like beveled home buttons. I like that different texture from my home button versus the volume buttons, and I just think it's attention to detail and a nice extra touch there. And taking a look at the back, you can see it's a glossy design here. It looks like glass, but I'm pretty sure it's plastic. But if you like that glossy glass back design, you're gonna like this. If you notice on the inside, it has kind of like this dot matrix pattern. And if you move it around in the light, especially daylight, it actually sparkles. So that's going to be something that's up to personal preference, if you're going to like that or not, but it definitely adds a bit of flair to the phone. And while I personally like a more of a matte back finish like on the Z Max Pro, I can see how this can appeal to folks who want that kind of glass back design and something that stands out a little bit more. The one thing I don't like about the back, I'll be honest, is that Cricket branding, but since this is a Cricket exclusive phone, I can understand that. Lastly on the back, attention to detail again. I like this chrome rim around the camera as well as a fingerprint sensor. I think it adds a little bit something to that back design. And like I mentioned before, the fingerprint scanner is pretty fast and reliable. Obviously it's not going to be the fastest on the market, but for a phone at this price point, there is no complaints. It's very accurate and it works pretty much all the time, so you're not going to have a problem with the fingerprint scanner, and the fact that it even comes with one is definitely a bonus. And lastly, as a part of design, the overall in-hand feel is good for a big device like this. It's got a slightly curved back, you can see on the sides there, that help add to a little bit of that in-hand feel. But since it has a large 16:9 display, it's going to be a wide phone, and so unless you have big hands, you're not going to have a great in-hand feel. For me, I have decent sized hands, and it is wider than most, and so it won't fit perfectly into the palm of my hand, but those curved edges definitely make a difference. And so instead of being just a flat rectangle, it's got some curves around the sides to help with that feel in your palm. And now moving on to battery, it has a decent sized 3,400 milliamp hour battery, and I won't lie, I'd like to see a larger battery in such a large phone. Other mid-range phones are managing to pack in 4,000 milliamp hour batteries plus, so a little bit larger than 3,400 would be appreciated, but it's still a decent sized battery for this phone. And it's still more than enough to get me through my full day and night. I usually need about 3 to 4 hours of screen on time since I work 5 days a week and I'm not always on my phone. And really great for me is going to be like 6+ hours of screen on time. That'll get me through almost 2 days. I've been averaging about 5 hours of screen on time on the Blade X Max, as little as 4 hours and 15 minutes to as much as 5.5 hours, really depending on my usage. And one odd thing that I notice if I go into my battery settings here is that sometimes Bluetooth, when I use it, even for just a few minutes of listening to some Bluetooth earbuds, it'll show it using 80% of the battery, and even when I just turned it on there, it's already showing at the top of my battery list as using already 6% from just turning it on. So any kind of usage for just even a couple of minutes connected to some headphones, it shows it consuming 80+% of the battery life, and that can't possibly be true because my actual battery life doesn't dip and it's not really impacting my battery life. So I'm guessing this is just another software quirk and possible bug in how the Bluetooth is being utilized and reported in the battery settings here. So if you see that on your unit, don't be alarmed. I see it on mine and it's not impacting my battery life at all. And last thing to mention about battery is that it does support Quick Charge 2.0 for fast charging, which is great. However, the included wall charger is not Quick Charge capable. So if you want Quick Charge and you don't already have one, you're going to need to go out and buy a Quick Charge adapter. So now moving on to cameras. The rear camera here is a 13 megapixel camera with autofocus. It has a 4x zoom and LED flash, as you see right there. It does not have stabilization, so no optical image stabilization or no software image stabilization, EIS, but it is capable of recording up to 1080p video at 30 frames per second. No 60 frames per second recording or 4K, but really don't expect that in a device at this price point. The front camera up top there is a 5 megapixel camera, and it is also capable of shooting at 1080p 30 frames per second video. So if we actually go into the camera app here real quick, you notice that it does have HDR up there, but there is no auto HDR, so if you want to use it, you're going to have to remember to toggle that on and off when you want to use it. It also does support a manual mode, as you can see here, so which is really great to see on a budget device. If you're into photos and you like fine-tuning your photos, you can go into manual mode and do all that here. They do support a few other photo modes such as panorama, multi-exposure, and time-lapse. So that's nice that they include a few other things, and you also do get your Instagram style filters if you like using those. Overall photos coming from this device and good light, you can get some great shots, including some nice macro shots with a shallow depth of field, that nice bokeh or blurred background that everyone loves. In some harsher direct afternoon light, the camera will struggle a bit, delivering some washed out or overexposed shots. Even in moderate light though, the photos can look good. And in low light, as you'd expect, is where the cameras are going to struggle. Turning on HDR can produce some actually great results, but in some tough lighting conditions, not even HDR is going to be able to help you out. Picture and audio quality while recording video from both their front and rear cameras in good light look and sound pretty good to me. Video will just be a bit shaky with either camera while moving around, as there is no stabilization like I mentioned to help smooth that out. In low light, the rear camera video gets noticeably shaky while panning around, and front camera video is pretty grainy and even more shaky. I did a whole video of camera samples of both photos and videos in all kinds of lighting conditions, both good light and low light, so feel free to check out that video for a lot more samples to go ahead and judge the quality yourself. But overall, I think the cameras on this device here way exceeded my expectations and definitely outperformed its price point I think you're going to be very happy with the set of cameras on the ZTE Blade X Max here. So now let's move on to audio, and as far as external speakers are concerned on the Blade X Max, you just have one rear firing speaker there on the bottom, but it does get pretty loud, and I tested it against the Galaxy S8 and it's on par with how loud the Galaxy S8 gets. If anything, it might get a tad bit louder. So even though it's a single rear firing speaker, it does actually get fairly loud. But you can go ahead and judge for yourself. I'll play a quick sample here. That's at 50% volume. We'll crank it all the way up to full. So not too bad, but like I said, nothing special. It is, after all, just a single cell phone speaker. However, internal audio is a different story, and that's where this thing really impressed. To me, the sound was incredibly impressive, and I was really amazed at how good the internal audio actually sounds. So I tested this with both in-ear earbuds as well as some high-end over-the-ear headphones, and they both produced great results. I think the difference really is this Dolby Audio app, and I don't think it's a gimmick. It definitely makes a difference in the sound quality. And if you go into this Dolby Audio app like I showed before, you can actually go ahead and select from a different presets as well as customize your own. And while you can't precisely customize it, at least you can customize it a little bit to more of your tastes. And sound clarity is much better than listening through headphones on my Galaxy S8, even after enhancing the audio on the S8 with its own EQ settings and that UHD audio. The internal audio through headphones is clearly better and really does impress on the Blade X Max. I think you're going to be more than happy with the audio output through headphones on this phone. And getting into some of the final categories here, calling and messaging, since this is a phone after all, calls sound nice and clear both ways, and I don't have any kind of issue with SMS or MMS messaging. This does have an HD voice option. You can see there with the enhanced LTE services if you turn that on. But there is no native Wi-Fi calling, so no Wi-Fi calling over the Cricket network. So just one last quick note on connectivity. It does not support the 5 GHz Wi-Fi band. 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi is supported, but if you're like me or my work, Wi-Fi is only supported on that 5 GHz Wi-Fi, you're going to be out of luck. And some last little odds and ends as far as lifestyle type of features. There is no wireless charging or water resistance or waterproofing of any kind. But again, at this price point, those features shouldn't be expected, but it is worth pointing out in case those things are really important to you. Alright, so let's wrap this up with some pros and cons. For me, the pros are that it has some pretty fast and fluid performance. I like the light software with some nice customizations like Dolby Audio and the fingerprint app launching. It has the latest version of Android 7.1.1. It has a nice, brilliant and vibrant 6-inch display. I like the backlit capacitive buttons. The fingerprint sensor is included, which is great at this budget price. Above average in all-day battery life. It has a great camera for its price point, and it's got some amazing internal audio for some headphone listening. And for me, the cons are that there are frequent app reloads due to only having 2 GB of RAM. Software quirks like the YouTube bug where you can't watch 60 frames per second video. Almost all the memory shows as used. Bluetooth shows using a lot of battery when it really isn't. And the camera quick launch isn't working. Also, it supports Quick Charge 2.0 but does not include a quick charge adapter. The single rear mounted speaker, no support for 5 GHz Wi-Fi, no Wi-Fi calling or wireless charging, and it's not water resistant. So now the question is, would I recommend this phone? To me, absolutely. If you're a Cricket customer or looking to move to Cricket, I highly recommend this phone. It far exceeds its price point and you'll be very happy for the $100 to $150 you're spending. Even if you're not a Cricket customer and are on another GSM network like AT&T and T-Mobile, if you can get this unlocked, it'll work on those networks. So this could also be a low-cost option for you as well. I use this as my main phone for 1 month, and usually using budget phones, I can't wait to put them down. However, the Blade X Max gave me an experience well above the budget phone category, and if I wasn't addicted to smartphones and always wanting to try the latest and greatest, I could definitely continue to use this as my daily phone. So that's my review of the Blade X Max. Again, thanks to ZTE for sending me the phone to review. Let me know if you have any other questions or comments, and as always, thanks for watching.